the town has already created. The Economic Development Committee is an awesome, from what we've heard, is an awesome resource for the community and for the town in terms of offering grants, but also offering a voice for businesses in the sort of governmental process. And again, another sort of just kudos to the community is, you proactively initiated this search into what can help your minority and women-owned businesses. So next slide, Morgan. So during the course of, so we did the sort of, in terms of the compliment sandwich, we did the compliments, the things that you guys are doing well, and then the areas where there could be some improvement. So there are a couple of themes that sort of arose during the course of our study. We're going to dig into these a little bit later in our conversation with the committee. But the sort of 4 high-level themes are communication. The town has worked to communicate effectively and consistently with its various populations, including its minority and women-owned businesses, but it could do a better job, and in some cases a more consistent job. There is, in some cases, sort of a mismatch between what the staff understands that the town offers to the business community. And so there isn't always a consistent understanding across all levels of staff within Town Hall. There are the town bylaws and regulations. Really, this is kind of what I would say is sort of not a smaller thing, I don't want to minimize it, but it's really around things that have come in today's society in terms of gender-neutral language in regulation and in bylaws, so that when people read the bylaws, it's not always he, board member, things of that nature. There's I wouldn't say a push, but there's a interest in having more minority and women-owned representation on town boards. In some instances, aware of the opportunities to join and participate, their participation as businesses. Member of city staff who would be the best person or office to implement the proposed recommendations. So with that sort of high-level overview, we have a number of more detailed slides that get into each finding, and these slides were emailed over to the committee beforehand, so I hope that everyone has had an opportunity to look at them. What we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to the committee to ask questions. We can go to the appropriate slides to discuss the recommendations, the findings and the recommendations, and we're really hoping that this can be a two-way conversation. The report is not finalized. We'll be drafting that over the next month or so, and we really want to incorporate all of in the same way that we incorporated the comments from the business community, from city staff, we'd also like to incorporate the thoughts and comments from this committee as well, to make sure that we produce a document that is reflective of where the community wants to go and the best pathway to get there. So at this point, I'll turn it over to the committee if you have any questions or comments.
How connected are they to the to the town information? So you spoke about not having the information or communicated about the board. How proactive are these businesses? In seeking out these kinds of things. There's personal responsibility to be able to, to join a board or to get involved. It's something that I think that most people would, if they want to do, they inquire. What could we do better in those inquiries? Or are they making those inquiries? Or, are they expecting, people to go out to ask them to join the board?
So I'm going to turn over to Karen to help me find where the right recommendation right finding and recommendation is. But at a high level, one of the things that we notice is that in terms of proactive communication, we did notice, and you'll find one of the findings is that the website is in some ways, it's hard as a business owner to go from the website to get to where the information would be that might be that would be important to you in terms of wherever you are in your process. So that's, that can be a small thing, but that can be a big thing because that's one of the first places a person will go to look in terms of sort of going forward in the process. Number two, the one-stop shop is great. It's a great resource. Every business that we spoke to, I think, spoke very highly of the one-stop. However, some of the follow-up coming out of the one-stop, and then as you go throughout the process and you start meeting with other boards or other officials, there can sometimes be a feeling of a disjointed feeling from the applicant's perspective. And so there are suggestions, there are ways to sort of improve their perception of that process. And then sort of lastly, more of sort of a more softer touch thing is one of the things that we did notice in our interviews specifically with the businesses was that businesses that had more of a longer standing relationship with the town in terms of being longer term residents seem to have better connections to some of the resources just through that informal network of people talking and communicating versus some of your or sort of more new residents wouldn't have those similar connections. So that sort of feeds into this conversation about being more intentional about trying to understand who the populations are that don't have that same reach into the community and the strategy of making sure that you touch them in the various places they go, whether it's a temple, a mosque, the community groups that may not have the same level of visibility as other groups. So those are just sort of some of the three high-level areas that it's not about the town not wanting to or having an interest in doing it. It's about sort of that intentional directed effort, and that's where a lot of those recommendations are going to be. I'll turn over to Karen for more of the specifics.
Yeah, so that is a great question, and I think if we go through each of the overviews of each of these departments, that would probably help us, and those are our summary slides. You'll find when you get into the details of the recommendations and the findings that we presented, that your question is, as Anthony alluded to, it's touched in different areas. So the structures, as you said, are great and in place, but I know that you're already revitalizing the ambassador program. It's providing more connectivity with the folks who may not know where to ask for questions or know what the opportunities are. That's sort of what we saw with, specifically with minority and women-owned businesses. Some are very connected, but some don't have those deep roots that would say, you run into somebody and they say, oh, there's an opening on this board. It's just like any other community member. If they don't know, they don't know. So throughout the report that you'll ultimately get, and you'll see in the slides and the findings, are those specific things like improving the website, improving the economic development ambassador program, or revitalizing it, not improving it, revitalizing it, making sure those community partners that Mark is in touch with so that, it's like any other community engagement problem. It's like, how do you reach folks? And if you're very intentional about finding it, you'll find those recommendations. So we have those four different areas. We thought we would go through and say, okay, let's talk about communications and the overview. And then if you had specific questions about the details in there, then we can pull up the details or we can dive into those. So do you want to start? Do you have that?
I think it starts on more. Oh, there. Yeah. So trying to make sure I'm in the right place as well.
Yeah, it's slide 6 on our.
Right, great. So, in some ways I could sort of read the slide, but I'll just sort of touch on the bulleted points at the bottom. So, as we said, it's about sort of intentionally reaching these groups that don't even know sort of where to begin. Again, I just like to highlight on the good. So the one-stop shop, you have the economic development coordinator. That person has been very proactive in sort of reaching out to the community, which is very good. You've got the one-stop, which I think every business we spoke to, if not every, 90% of all the businesses we spoke to used that. Some of the friction comes in, particularly for minority and women-owned businesses, is how to get there in the first place in some cases, and what to do next. And so some of our recommendations are around creating guides. One of the things that we did here consistently is we have to deal with different departments, at least 3 or 4, building, fire, the health, the Board of Health. Those are sort of at a minimum if you're opening a restaurant or something of that nature. And that's, food service is a big part of this community sort of group of businesses. And so it would be helpful to sort of map out, maybe not all the details, but at a high level, here's where you're going to go, and here's what you should be looking for an outcome. And so that they can go there and they can understand, here's what are the things I need from this particular department to go on to the next step. And an emphasis, and this is something that that municipalities, I think in particular, have to really focus on, which is user experience. As someone who worked in municipality, sometimes you can get focused on getting your job done, but there's someone who's just coming in for the first time, and this is all sort of new to them, whereas it may be routine for you. So, just a sort of, and we've got suggestions in our report on how to do it, but, just focusing at a staff level on thinking about the person who's coming in first, that whole customer experience piece. Building more into your economic development coordinator as a guide for businesses, and a lot of that can be around sort of the process in terms of how they help this person, how internally other departments connect with your economic development coordinator so that he knows or she knows what's happening in their department relative to individual businesses, but also relative to what they're doing sort of in general in terms of their overall process flow, just so that that person or that position has an understanding and can be that mediator for your minority and women-owned businesses and businesses in general. You're already reinvigorating the EDC Ambassador Program. We discussed the proactive coordination, communication, and one piece that I didn't touch on in the overview, which is this accessibility, translatability piece. We understand that there aren't really many documents produced by Town Hall that are in other languages, and that's worth exploring. One of the things that, and Karen maybe could talk to us a little bit more, but one of the things that we did here when we talked to departments was that there is a significant sort of English as a second language population in Westborough. Everybody's been sort of figuring it out when people come into Town Hall, and it's everybody has the best intentions, but there may be a little bit more thought put into having some documents translated. Even if you don't have multilingual staff in the building, you may be able to have some sort of, like these user guides or process maps translated into other languages so that a person can sort of have that as their own reference. Now, we've talked about this, so I just want to touch on this a little bit more. You want to be careful because, you write things and people don't always understand, or they, you can read something and get a different direction. So it really is about that human touch, but having some stuff translated for a person to refer to in their own language that they understand is just a very helpful thing for the individual. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Right, and then you'll see in the recommendations, there's also just some real in-the-weeds stuff, like how do you put documents on your website? So if somebody wants to use a Google Translate, that it's in a format that they can do it. Just that sort of, really in-the-weeds stuff that will assist somebody. We did speak with a lot of folks who are like, no, we figured it out, we know what to do, but if they can't pull a document that they need to understand something from the website, or if they're handed it in a format that isn't supporting those sorts of tools, you've missed an opportunity. So that's like seriously in the weeds, but it will make a big difference to folks that can address the situation without resources from the town if it's all there. I think that's it. So we'll have that in the final report of just sort of those nuts and bolts accessibility tools.
And just before we go on to, I'm going to open it up to more questions, but before I do on that, just because it touches on this as well, the staff training and communications piece. One of the things that that was also sort of interesting in the when we spoke with department heads or staff in Town Hall, was that there wasn't always a consistent understanding of sort of a broad spectrum of town staff, excuse me, of the one-stop shop or the economic development coordinator. So, I just say at a high level here that sort of one of our suggestions are on how do you create that cohesive understanding of what people do. So one of the things that we heard is that one of your high community touch points, particularly for someone who does not have deep roots or deep understanding of Westborough, is going to be your two high touch points, and there wasn't always a consistent understanding about the services offered throughout town government. Development coordinator and the one-stop shop. And so improving those communications, the one-pagers, or I'm sorry, the process maps could be helpful even for those staff in terms of understanding where to direct people or answer questions even before they get to any of those groups. So I'll stop here and I'll, if there are any other questions.
Add just one
Sure.
thing. So on the communications umbrella, one of the themes that really is throughout this whole process has been you have an economic development coordinator, which is awesome, and to reinforce that role as the gatekeeper for folks that are trying to start businesses. It touches both staff training, it touches communications, it touches regulations, all the different categories. So that is a general theme that that poor Mark's going to have a long list of to-dos, but it really is important because, as we said, if somebody walks into the town clerk's office and says, I want to start a business, and they don't know to say, you might want to go down the hall and talk to our EDC coordinator, that's another missed opportunity. So we've really, I want to just emphasize that we were really excited that you have all these pieces. It's not like you're missing huge pieces. We just are trying to have the connectivity that will serve this population, but will also help the rest of the community seeking businesses. So good segue to, which I'm missing the slide on staff training, so.
Well, I kind of touched on it, but I want to sort of open up if there are any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Good for now.
Yeah.
The only thing I'd ask on that, if we do documents in different languages, it'd be helpful to know what specific languages might be helpful. I can imagine a couple of them, but it'd be, if we can drill down to what languages would be most helpful to translate the documents into as well.
For whatever reason, I'm going blank here, but I think we do have some, we have identified some, but I'll make sure that those are in there.
Yeah.
Am I right on that? Or?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
I just wrote it down. So we'll double check with the data and give you sort of the, It was interesting because the spoken language data, I think I'm right on this, the spoken language data in the community isn't exactly, it doesn't align with what your small businesses, majority of the small businesses speak. So we'll reconcile that and give you a recommendation on that.
If I could talk a little bit sort of like back of the napkin. So we've got a lot of data on population trends. And so you've got I think your biggest increase has probably been in Spanish-speaking population, and that would be reflected in your schools. But when we look at the business community, the small business community, you're seeing more of your Southeast Asian community languages as well as sort of the Indian subcontinent. So those are going to be your highest percentage language groups from your new and small and minority and women-owned business population. So.
All right. Staff training and communication over here.
So I already touched. So. Suggested trainings, and this isn't that there are any glaring problems with staff, but there are some trainings that are available that staff might benefit from, specifically customer service trainings around how to serve customers, and trainings around implicit bias. We have heard. And it's a tough thing that during some inspections, some business owners may have felt like they would have liked to be able to ask more questions, or that it could have been more informative versus, in some ways, sort of dictatorial. So again, it's not that anyone's doing anything wrong necessarily, but it's a style of communication. And that's sort of where some of those trainings focus on. I already spoke on sort of improved internal communications. How do people understand what's available and where to direct people if they need help? A standardization around a standard operating procedure for town hall internally that has both an internal and external facing component. So for example, one of the things we did notice is that to get a business certificate, a person has to first go to the building department to get a determination of their zoning. And we spoke with the departments that do that, and there's reasons for asking for that information, but it could be less onerous on the business owners if, rather than going to another department, maybe there was an extra form or an optional form to fill out when you're getting a business certificate in the clerk's office that could then be forwarded to the other department. So then that person's not running from department to department. So so we got suggestions in that way. Collecting data and writing yearly reports. There seems to actually be an interest, particularly from the coordinator's office and the economic development department, in terms of understanding what's happening at a data level. Just let's collect the data, but that should be consistently discussed with all departments that you want to get the data from, everybody on the same page, looking at the data and consistently understanding what's being collected, why it's being collected, and making common decisions. And I already sort of touched on with this conversation about the business certificates, just identifying where you can lower the hurdles for regulatory requirements. And that doesn't mean sort of getting rid of them, but structuring them in the way. I just made the suggestion of sort of, rather than having a person go to multiple departments, having them all filled out, whatever their point of contact is, just restructuring things in a way that has a lower effort input from the applicant, to the extent possible. The regulations are there for a reason. So the suggestion is not to get rid of them, just to structure them in a way that they don't negatively impact the applicant. And we've got suggestions in there. Any comment?
I would just say, it's part of the training is that, as I said, reinforcing that the gatekeeper, EDC, that piece is strong and everyone knows it's a resource. That will help make those, sort of that hand-holding that this group needs more than connected businesses. One of the things that I don't think Anthony mentioned, if he did, I'm sorry, is in each department, where people had the best experience was when there was a consistent point of contact that was informed about all of the resources. So internally, that is one of the recommendations, is to figure out a way to do that internal training so that you give the tools to everyone in the building that they can make those connections as well. And that's just that's again a specific thing that can really make an impact for somebody walking the door who doesn't know what they're supposed to do. Obviously, first stop, you should go talk with Mark, but if they walk into any department and say, hey, I'm going to do this, what do I do? The person they're talking to is somebody that they can have a conversation with, who can give them the tools that they need, to your point, to what do they do next, So that was a specific, let me just scroll through. Data collection, that is just a really good practice, obviously. The more you know about who's walking in the door and what their experience is, the more down the road you can say, okay, we need to tweak this, we need to tweak that. But in order to do that, you need to have the information gathered. So that's a specific recommendation on sort of the internal house stuff.
If I could just add to that,
Yep.
I'd like to just give a shout out to Commissioner Leonardo. So if I go back to sort of the piece about if you go get a business certificate at the clerk's office, they then direct you to the building department to get a zoning determination. We spoke to the commissioner about that, and one of the reasons was to understand where people are operating businesses, and if it's in the incorrect zone place, to identify that at the start rather than later on down the line when sort of they've moved along. And so that's in the data collection zone, and again, the intentions there are good. And so, that data is very helpful at the administrative regulatory level. And the question is just around how do you structure that for the applicant? And and still collect the appropriate data to make the right decision at the most convenient point in time.
Any questions about that overview? I know once you get through, I'll be able to.
Just a couple quick ones. In regards to the training, customer service and implicit bias, do you provide recommendations on sort of in-person versus online? Should there be, I guess, some testing? Should this be an annual?
So we didn't provide any recommendations about in-person versus online. We can look at that, but that's not in our initial assessment, so we can go back and look at that. Versus in-person or versus the timing and the frequency of that. I believe that all the trainings that I've looked at, they're annual, or for the most part, the majority are annual. I don't know if we have any specific recommendations on the frequency in the report, but we don't recommend any specific trainers. Depending on who you talk to, they'll have recommendations on when and how they should do their training in terms of duration, location, things of that nature.
Okay.
That's what I do for a living, so we can certainly talk about that.
Okay, you have recommendations? Excellent, thank you. And then did you identify any local regulatory hurdles that you think we ought to assess, or just, was that more of a general statement?
So I keep going back to it. So one of the big ones sort of we thought of, and when I say regulatory hurdles, we don't necessarily mean sort of remove a regulation or regulatory requirement, but it's more around sort of the application of sort of requirements onto the applicant. So I've already sort of talked about the business certificates and the relationship to the zoning determination. We've heard some about trying to think about the best way to phrase this, about fire regulations specifically. One has come up around the hoods. Now that is, I think, a regulation that comes down from the state, and then we've provided some recommendations on how to maybe phase those regulations in when they're updated or changed at the appropriate level. Some of these things often sort of feed into each other. So part of it is also part of communication. There's a change coming down the line. How do we communicate that to prospective applicants as well as existing and ongoing businesses? I can just say that when we spoke to the businesses that were food service or had something to do with sort of fire on premises, the changes around those regulations and sort of their time period of understanding what that meant for them, that was sort of an area of interest for the businesses that we spoke to. Move on, or do you have anything else?
Sure.
So we actually kind of already touched on this, town bylaws and regulations. So I already sort of talked about I think of them more as examples, sort of the business certificates, the fires. At a higher level, this isn't sort of about streamlining the regulation process. This is about regulations that the businesses community might want to have the town look at. So this is sort of at a higher level. Your planning board, your historic commission, the select board. Some of the businesses, and I think that this is a point of tension, but there's an interest around signage, particularly in the downtown area, and around how business can have more flexibility in terms of the types of signs they want in terms of attract business downtown. And again, a lot of these businesses, I think it's very interesting. The community has really two business hubs. One is here, the downtown area. Then you have a corridor. I forget what's called the Worcester Turnpike. They have different sort of regulations, but you get a lot of your sort of smaller, more accessible businesses here in the downtown historic area, and there's some confusion around. Well, there's an interest in having more flexibility in terms of signage, and then there's some confusion around the interactions between what's allowed in terms of signage and how those interact with the historic nature, things of that nature. And I know that the town has been in the process of sort of coordinating that and which boards or commissions have the authority over those things, but that's just an area of interest or concern for those businesses, and that's where a lot of your minority and women-owned businesses are centered in your historic downtown area. Anything to add there, Karen?
Well, I would just say, yeah, I know that, you've made strides to kind of correct that situation, and it comes back to the same, you don't know what you don't know, and to make sure that as you make those changes that either the EDC that all of the avenues of communication are relaying that to folks, because it was, it happened, I know you're all aware, many times people would invest in a signage to be told that it didn't meet code or did not. To get ahead of that so that people have the right expectations will improve trust in the town hall, obviously, lower costs for businesses because they're not spinning their wheels, and meet the regulations that the town want to have in place. So that was a specific thing. I know we're kind of catching up as we write to what you've already changed over the last few, well, most of this year, we've been working on this. But that those sorts of things, that being mindful of, you can't change certain regulations, but you can change how you make sure folks know about it, and that will have an impact both for the businesses and for internal staff when they aren't backpedaling on something that they don't understand, why they don't understand it, if that makes sense.
Any questions before we move on, or? I'm going to turn the next one over to you, Karen. It's on the town boards and committees.
All right, so this is our last bulk of things we've already talked about, and you've already taken steps to revitalize the ambassador program. As we said at the beginning, you have the pieces, and being able to, especially for this group of businesses, to be able to knock on the door consistently and say, hey, have you seen the new fire regs? Hey, did you know the EDC grants were open? Whatever it is, to have that, we really heard that people want that information and that they may not necessarily know where to find it. So that will go a long way in sort of connecting minority and women-owned businesses closer to your work. It's really this board's work. And then we did have some specific recommendations about the grant program. We heard folks who got them, of course, we're very happy, but that there was some confusion about how do I qualify, when is, just the real specifics about criteria needed that and I know that you're revising that as well, specific criteria, so that folks feel that they know what to expect, they know they have a fair shot, and they know what they need to do. Obviously, that all melds into going to the one-stop meeting with Mark, all of that all works together. But, folks don't know about the grant and application, they're not going to obviously go for it. And if they feel they're not being consistently awarded for the criteria, that erodes sort of folks' confidence in being able to partner with the town. So those were easy changes on that. Let me just see. And Anthony mentioned this at the beginning. Interestingly, we heard from a lot of folks who serve on boards and committees the desire to have the composition of the boards more accurately reflect the demographics of the community. But to your original point, how do you get folks in? And that really is an outreach effort that needs to be coordinated. That the boards are welcoming, the community is saying, if I walk in and I have somebody that speaks my language or looks more like me, you feel more comfortable. It's just natural. So that's sort of a soft recommendation, but will have an impact that we heard across the board from sort of every population we talked to. It is and this is a question for, I guess, Fred, it seems that your DEI committee has been dormant for a while. We can talk about that later, that, we weren't able to talk to any members of the DEI committee, but that's another area of opportunity that can work hand in glove with the EDC to make sure that you can, you've got a group that's specifically trying to diversify, working with you to do exactly what you're saying on the recruiting minority and small women-owned businesses. let me just run through, and I think that's, we have lots of specific requirements. You can get in the weeds, and we really would like your comments before we actually draft the document that you'll get, if you see any areas where you think we need to strengthen or had more questions.
I just want to just add on to one point about the grant awards from the EDC. So, you know, the community loves them. They love the grant program. But there's a confusion around the actual awarding process. So we've looked at the, you know, you have two criteria documents. You have the new businesses and you have the existing business criteria documents. I think they're actually pretty well written and well thought out. You have your sort of, if you check off these boxes, you'll get 5 or 10 points depending on where the emphasis is, whether if at the time of granting the emphasis is on new businesses, then, you know, you have your point structure in a way that sort of emphasizes or elevates those criteria versus your existing businesses. The confusion is not around, I think, your existing scoring criteria. It's around, I think, the deliberations that happen at the granting meeting. And so there's some specific provisions around allowing the board flexibility in terms of the scores are more of a guide than anything else. And I think one of the suggestions that will probably come in the report, and I really would love to hear what you guys have to say, is rather than sort of a loose guide, maybe having a threshold requirement so that people understand, I got this score, so I'm in this range, so I'm, you know, one of 3 or 4, whoever, who are actually eligible, and then you can have your flexible discussions around those grantees. Now that's, you know, that you guys are here, you're in this community that has implications, but that's one of the things in terms of limiting flexibility for the committee would be one of the things that would help applicants understand more about who is or isn't getting the grant. That's you know, that's kind of not a hard and fast rule, but that's an area of suggestions to sort of go into, is to think about how you might limit your own flexibility in terms of the granting so that people have more understanding or confidence in the process. And that's, you know, there's a give and take there for the board to consider.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that, I mean, the whole grant program and distributing the grants has come a long way. We used to not have anything at all to guide us, and so it was very arbitrary. I think the rubric is something that is, as much as we say it, we don't have to adhere to it necessarily. I think we have historically. I do like the idea of maybe having a minimum number you need to achieve. I think that would help us to limit the number of applicants we have coming in here. But I think this whole grant program is going to be continuously evolving, and so I don't want to kind of you know, hog tie ourselves as far as what we can and can't do. I think the rubric was meant for just more guidance, but not necessarily something that we have to adhere to, and if somebody scores higher than somebody else, then they automatically get it. That's not the intent of it. It's to provide us with some additional guidance to help us figure out how to distribute those funds. So.
And I want to just reemphasize, people love it. They love the EDC that you're offering the grants, and no one's, from the conversations we've had, no one's leaving the meetings upset. There's just some confusion around, you know, how did they get, so.
No,
so,
I know firsthand, I had somebody that mentioned to me that, you know, the amount of time and effort it took them to apply for the grant and then come in and meet with the town, and they only, you know, they got $2,000. Not that they, you know, weren't appreciative of that, but at the end of the day, if it was only going to be $2,000, they might not have spent as much time and decided to even apply for it. So I get it. I understand.
do you want to do something here?
I think there was a question on chat, and I see Holly's got her hand up, and I don't have any control over the Zoom, so I wanted to just go to our virtual friends. Holly,
I actually did. No, I'm good.
okay.
Thank you.
And Morgan, can you see what's in the chat if there's a question? Or is it just I can't hear.
I did see it. It was about technology. Hold on. Are we planning to use, or I guess it's Westborough, are you planning to use what technology the revamped website, as well as any sort of automation for communication and response improvement. It's not something that's in our recommendations right now. We're really working on the human level of communication, but that could be something that could be used in the future for the EDC website, I believe. But right now we're trying to drive all, oh, I can hear that echo, I'm sorry. All applicants to the ED coordinator as a gatekeeper. We're trying to reify that position and make sure that everyone within town government as well as in the community knows to go to him first and foremost.
There are some in the weeds, you'll see recommendations on the website, just wayfinding. You know, on your EDC website, or the EDC website, you gotta go looking hard to find Mark's name. And that's something, you know, back to the original theme of that's your gatekeeper. That's the folks, you know, who's gonna be the best resource for folks. So, you know, on the website, we recommend, let's make sure that, you know, that's prominent and things like that. So we will recommend those sorts of website improvements. It's really not changing any technology, but these notes are exactly what we're looking for. And so as you go, if you have time and, you know, because nobody's doing anything this month, look at the detail, look through and any comments, questions, concerns, you think we've gone up this way and we should be going up this way, that's the sort of feedback we will incorporate, because it's really, you're the ones implementing a lot of this, that will that will incorporate into the final draft document, which will explore that. So we've set you a deadline of December 15th to get those comments to us, and
Which
I think they're going to,
I think may be a challenge for us, given the fact that it's really a week and a half away. My preference would be to get at least a few members of the committee's input on this, if people are willing. But I know we picked up an extra day here with the date incorrect, but I think a week and a half could be challenging for us. I don't know how others feel about that, but I don't know if it's appropriate to put together a quick subcommittee to get together and kind of come up with our feedback to provide to them. But what's driving the December 15th date?
holidays more
Yeah,
than
and I think it's around,
Because you want to have your
I mean, you're
trying to get
final.
our, yeah, and trying to get our report. But I mean, if, you know, we're in conversations with Commissioner Leonardo, so if, you know, I think you guys are going to have conversations if we need to adjust that timeline. I think we can.
How do
you know,
others
assuming that's
feel
what
about that? I
everyone
mean,
agrees.
Freddie, you?
We hadn't anticipated a formal meeting to respond to comments. That's why, so if I mean, this is up to the board. If that's something you want and you want us to allow you more time so that you can have a formal meeting, then let us know that. But we were anticipating board members send us comments individually. But we can work with whatever works best for the committee. But if people send us comments individually, or me comments individually, then, you know, you don't have to worry about open meeting law. But if it is something that you want to discuss at a future meeting and you would like us to build in that flexibility in the timeline, then of course you can do that. So it's up to you all.
So Todd, I think what the suggestion is, it's up to the board, obviously. If you'd rather have just the individuals from the board comment directly back to UMass and this group, you can do that, as opposed to having a working group.
Right,
The working group will draw the process out a little bit more.
right.
So it's up to the committee which way they'd prefer to do this. I don't think the timing is 100% critical. They were just trying to get the report back to us by,
Sure.
you know, soon.
Yeah,
and
so we're the ones
early.
driving the deadline, so we could
And I
really
believe
say to you,
you guys had mentioned that Fred and I were meeting with you again to go over one more meeting, so there'd be a chance, and that would be in, I think we were saying this would be in January? wasn't
So
it?
our timeline is, and it really, it is, you're the client. You can, our process timeline, and we can figure out the dates, is we do this presentation, give you a chance to digest what we've given you, and then provide us with comments. We take your comments and draft, I mean, right now we've got the PowerPoint, which is pretty detailed, but we want to turn that into an actual report with answering these questions and presenting it in a way that is a roadmap going forward. So the next step for us would be to draft that draft document. Then we were going to meet with Mark and Fred and have you review it, see what you thought, see where we needed to tweak it before the final document was created. We work backwards from a date where we just thought was good. So the dates can be, I mean, whatever works with you guys. Holidays mess things up, obviously, because people's attention wanes. Honestly, one of the factors of giving a deadline is if it's too far out in the future, things tend to drag and people forget what they've been told. So there's that balance of getting focused attention, addressing the holidays, and not having this go on for another 4 months. Because we would like to we want to meet your needs, but we want to make sure we get the best document we can for you. So do you want to think about how you want to do that, or?
How do the other committee members feel about it? You want to give feedback individually, or do you think a quick working session, one meeting working session to review comments and send something in collectively would make more sense?
This is Holly. I would propose individually getting our comments as board members, maybe over to Mark or just someone, and then they can send it off as a whole document. I don't know about the working meeting unless we do it after Christmas.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree, send individual comments to one person on the committee, that we may all have the same thoughts or similar thoughts, so just kind of bullet points, whatever we agree.
And I reviewed most of their document. It's great information, and some of the stuff we're already in process of changing and working on, so it's not all brand-new stuff to us. Some of it is stuff that we've proactively been doing for a while now. So some of the comments might be great to suggest us in a direction where to go, but I think it's really about, for us, it's about trying to shape our goals for 2024 and what kind of things we can take out of this to aim for the EDC to complete, myself and the committee as well, to complete for next year.
Okay, so if we get you our comments a week from today, does that give you enough time?
That
to
should
get
be
it
enough
wrapped up?
time, and I'll get to them.
Okay.
We can put them together. And
All right, we'll do that.
I just have one question. When you're talking about the website, are you talking about our updated website that we recently did, or?
So we started this study before the website was updated, and it did come to our attention that the website was being changed and updated. So most of these suggestions do come from the old website, but as we do the final draft, we're going to look at and see if anything has been covered in the new website. I guess I don't want to expose anyone that we talked to, but that did come up during our interviews, particularly with staff, and that there was a new website coming up. We didn't give any recommendations for the new website. So all of these things may not be covered in the changes that happen to the website.
Okay. Yeah, I would definitely be interested to see that. In the planning department, we tried to make a lot of updates and simplify things so that it was easier to understand. And then I do have a comment. I wanted to know if you looked at the design review board at all and their guidelines, because they have sign permits come in front of them. And one of the things we're looking at is simplifying the design guidelines they have. Right now, they're 40 pages long, and we're trying to figure out a way to simplify that for business owners. So I'd be interested to see that feedback if any of the people that you surveyed or business owners had feedback specific to that. And I'm also really interested in the languages. So in planning, I'm always conscious of the EJ communities, the environmental justice communities, and I'm curious if the business owners, the languages that you're talking about reflect the EJ communities.
So,
Anthony, if I may,
yeah, Morgan.
unfortunately, as Anthony and Karen indicated before, we don't have any conclusive data about particular languages to translate materials into. What our recommendations are is to collect the data moving forward in applications or on applications in meetings with applicants to see where what languages you need to translate materials into. We will, in the report, provide the data sources that we have, though for the planning department, it's nothing that you're not aware of, right? We go to the DESE education data, but as Anthony indicated, the students you're educating doesn't necessarily track to mean the businesses that are applying for applications or the contractors applying for building permits. And then your census data, but again, it doesn't necessarily match to the business data. So in the survey, when we asked, which of course, we came across the bump of our survey tool not doing the auto translation that we thought it could do. So the survey was in English unless you have a web translator tool using. We did ask if there were languages that folks would like materials translated into, and the only answer we got was Tagalog. So we will provide all that information in the report, but unfortunately, we won't be coming to you with like, definitely translate all materials into X language, which we had hoped to do. But I think what is important for the town is to remember that the folks applying for building permits might be different than the folks applying for land use permits, who might be different from the folks applying or running most of your restaurants. So we're definitely recommending that moving forward, the town collect data and ask applicants about language accessibility. And we have specific recommendations on making sure all your forms are translatable using any online tools so that on the user end, things can be translated easily. But we recommend that the town continue to collect data and analyze that data because some forms in some departments should probably be translated in some languages versus others.
Okay, thank you.
And just briefly on the point about the Design Review Board, DRB, I think one of our big, we can, for the draft report, we can look more at the regulations, but one of the biggest findings that we did have, which I think the town may have already addressed, is oftentimes people didn't know who had control over the signage. Was it the Historic Commission or was it the Design Review Board? And that came up during our conversations with business owners. And then when we looked at the regulations, at the time that we looked at them, there was some confusion over who had authority over signage. And I think that I did hear something that the town is either streamlining that. One of the recommendations was place that authority in one board than the other, or maybe give the other board some ability to just look at or provide feedback, but there should be one decision maker.
It's the design review board now. Yeah, yes, and there's it recently changed. I've only been here since July as the planning director, but I don't know when they absorbed the historical commission's purview for signage review.
Yeah. And for us, I'll just be honest, that's kind of a careful thing because there are policy decisions around who makes what decisions and why. And so we don't necessarily say who should be the decision maker and what the decisions should be, but what the applicant experience is when it's sort of spread across these various places, we can speak to that.
So to be clear on that, just to, and I apologize if I wasn't, it is design review. Historical has been not bumped out. It was mutually agreed that historical would no longer view signs. So that was actually implemented more recently because it was done in March of '23. We had to wait for AG to approve the warrants to the town meeting. So it's actually an updated zoning as well. Albeit I don't know if it's in that, but it is updated, but it took a while. So it's only been implemented pretty much since Jenny got here. So that was more of in the last 4 or 5 months that it's been finalized.
But that's definitely good feedback to share with the design review board as we're looking at revising the design guidelines because they're incredibly long and there's many rules to comply with. And I know the feedback that I've received from business owners is that it's a little too much to understand. So a way that we can streamline that would definitely be beneficial. And so I'm looking forward to reading more about that feedback. We are online now for online permitting for design review board and planning.
Any other comments or questions?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Karen.
Thank you.
Anthony and Morgan, you guys have done a great job. We appreciate it. And we'll get our comments to Mark by next Tuesday
Any questions, anything, please shoot them over to me.
and get it off to you guys. Look
Thank you
forward
for
to
having us.
seeing
We
the final
really have
product.
appreciated being able to come and learn about Westborough and work with your community.
Well, thank you for coming out
Thanks
here.
very much.
Thank you.
I think we have to stop here.
What?
I think we have to stop here because of the misposts.
Oh.
Well,
We went forward with that is because they'd come all the way from Boston.
we're not voting on anything though, right? We could have updates from the, can you provide updates? No?
So technically,
Technically, Christie said no.
Okay.
And the clerk said,
Deb.
Deb said, since we're not voting on anything, she felt, unlike the select board, we're less of a concern since we're not, voting for anything like the select board with no executive sessions or anything.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I don't know what, I don't want, like I said, I had two different, I heard two different answers, so I don't know if we're better to stop. I don't want to take an opportunity not to
Yeah,
give
we should stop
information
then if the-
out.
essentially, you're at risk. It's
Yeah,
a
no,
violation
we'll
of
stop.
open meeting law to convene.
The only thing I would suggest that if there's a working group with the awards, that working group continue working.
I'll talk to Todd today and I'll talk to you. Get some names and we'll get some stuff out to get a small group, working group for that together.
Only because that can be critical. The updates, I don't think, there's nothing probably earth-shaking out there, but I don't want that process to stop because we missed a meeting. Not that we have to take a vote or do anything, but just a suggestion.
No, I agree. I have some categories out and I can send something out in an email that we can, get a small working group together and just meet once just to talk about it. I think maybe Todd, maybe Holly, I can ask if they would have a few minutes or anyone else interested
Yeah.
in suggestions for businesses for
Yeah.
me.
Yep,
And then,
happy to
and then
do.
also send out something about the grant program, which will be coming out next week. I have it all together. There's a quick little flyer in front of everyone now, and I'll send out the application and the overview. After this meeting, I have an email ready to go out later this morning. And if anyone has questions, I'm happy to go through that with anyone individually, and we can discuss it from there, but I'll put some more information on those.
Yeah, same thing, just direct them directly to Mark.
Yeah, don't talk in a group, just so we keep everything correct, obviously.
So sorry, did we want to post another meeting this month, or?
I don't think we necessarily need to have another meeting this month. Unless there's anything, I mean, if we're going to put together a small working group for the awards, I think that's probably the most pressing thing right now.
And then the other thing, and the only other thing about next month's meeting is the first Tuesday would be January 2nd. I don't know if we want to, push it back a week post January 2nd or,
9th.
Yeah, I think
so the Tuesday post, okay.
technically we can't vote on that, but if we're all in agreement, we'll.
You can send your opinions to Mark.
Yeah, if anyone has an opinion that changes from that, please send it to me, and I apologize for I guess there was a couple meetings, I guess the select board meeting tonight got postponed as well because of a mispost as well, so, I think the select board was a computer issue with the new system. Mine was a fat finger with, putting the Tuesday, December 6th on my agenda, so I apologize. Thanks, folks.
Got it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Move to adjourn? Second?
And if you're interested tonight, I'm doing an information session on the MBTA zoning in this hall at 7 PM.
Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Ken.
Jenny, I'm very happy to
Bye,
hear you
Mark.
guys
Bye,
are going to
Holly.
be taking a look at
Bye,
the
guys.
design guidelines for.
Okay.
It will be interesting.